a martial arts movie podcast.
I threw that shit before I walked in the room.
Featuring drunken Thai boxer Will.
Too bad you will die.
The also drunken wrestler Mark.
I said I don't want trouble.
And drunken karate master Zero.
You've lost your balls.
And now,
I know Kung Fu. You know, baby.
Fists of Fail.
All right, our objective today is to make this review of the movie shorter than the movie. And I don't think that will be very hard because this movie is possibly the longest movie we've covered on our show. Is that true? I don't think we've ever covered anything over 2 hours.
I can't recall either. We've gone into 2-hour discussions. I think one of our longest discussions has been The Magnificent Butcher.
Oh, that's right.
That episode goes for 2 hours. That contains a character, Butcher Wing, and that ties into our movie today.
Wow, look at all these little connections you made, Zero. I'm so proud of you. What are we talking about today? We're talking about Once Upon a Time in China.
You didn't write it down on your board.
I am not using the board today because I am lazy, and also I can't find my dry erase marker. So that's the real reason. And you
should still watch it on YouTube because maybe it'll show up if you keep nagging.
Oh yeah, I'll put it in After Effects.
Sure.
If I feel like rendering that. Yes, Once Upon a Time in China. If I could actually write this on the whiteboard, I would. And I would also say the theme of this month, which maybe by next week I'll have it up there. We are doing Once Upon a Time in China month. There you go. That's it. Nice and simple. I mean, obviously, some of you might know that there are 6 movies, but we're probably just going to cover the Jet Li featured ones.
That was the idea, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be completely frank here. I only seen the first 2, like, on repeat. I think I've seen the first 2, like, multiple times. It's been a while, though. And then the subsequent ones, they're kind of forgettable, in my opinion. I don't really remember them so much.
Yeah,
but even this...
I was just going to say, this is my first viewing of this movie. I understand.
Really?
This is a very, very important martial arts film, especially in Jet Li's career. And it's the first time I saw it. And, it's kind of strange. I actually owned the second movie on DVD in high school. I liked that one a lot, but I just never got around to watching the first one.
Interesting. I think I've probably seen both equal amount of times. However, neither one of them really were super memorable to me. I think the second one probably stands out more because of the final fight. But if you ask me, before watching this again, like to recap the story of either movie, I would have given you a blank stare. And then after rewatching it again, I'm like, wow, there might be a reason why I forgot the story because there's just a lot going on. This is a very complicated story.
There is a lot of story, and this was a little hard to sit through because it's essentially 2 stories kind of, smashed into one, which is kind of odd. I've mentioned many times how sometimes I fear going backwards to the older martial arts films because I'm afraid maybe the style and the pacing and just everything about it might feel a little too dated for me because I mostly watch some of the modern stuff. And this isn't even that old. This is 1991. And the writing and the storytelling just feels kind of dated. Maybe not dated is the best word. This needed an editor. This needed a lot of editing. This needed a lot of story revisions because essentially it's Jet Li, and then it's also Yoon Byu's story as well. Like he kind of jumps in and out of the plot, and then towards the end he takes over for a little too long, and the whole time I'm thinking, oh, this should be over already. Oh my god, this movie's still going.
Yeah. Oh man, there's like a can of worms that we can dive into right there. You mentioned a lot of things that we can branch off into their own topics. I mean, the last one you mentioned, I guess we'll get into. Yeah, it really does feel like two stories in one, right? So, and I guess I could lead me into what I was listening to during the commentaries. So during the commentaries, I was listening, and they said that there's a theory that goes around that this movie was technically two separate films, but then for the sake of truncation and making it digestible, because it probably would have felt more padded if we made it two movies out of this instead. They just truncated it and turned into one film. But then watching it, you still feels like two movies. But like or two stories that happen, simultaneously. But I completely buy that, like that the conspiracy theory that goes around.
You know what this feels like? This feels like two production interns were walking. They're going, towards each other. And then they bump into each other. The scripts fly up in the air, and somebody gets it all together and then hands it in, and it's a combination of like two films.
And those interns lock eyes, and then they fall in love. It becomes a rom-com right there. Okay, so on the topic of the commentaries, there's actually a bevy of information on the movie. We're probably not going to be able to get to all of it. Just you and I talking about all of it, because one, you can definitely listen to the commentary on the DVD for this movie. Try to listen to the Mark Adley version of it. Don't listen to the Bay Logan one. I think that the Mark, if I'm remembering the name correctly, that version is superior in every way. It has all the same information, and his guest commentator, well, his co-host is not a complete boring sack of shit like the original version. But anyways, you can find a whole like wealth of information on the movie. But I think you and I should just talk about this from like the standpoint of just moviegoer, like a standard moviegoer, because
just give our general opinions on it. We don't need to go into so many details unless it's you find it interesting, right?
Of course. But like, I mean, but it's still inescapable that we're going to have to talk about the legend of Wong Fei Hung, which is like probably what makes the movie interesting. Like all the background behind the movie, the influence of this movie. I think all those things are slightly more interesting than the movie. Now that we're 30 years out after the release of this movie. So I guess that's the reason why we're covering it for this month.
Yes, it's the 30-year anniversary on August 15th, apparently.
Yeah. And, so Wong Fei Hung. That's the character that Jet Li plays. And this is like one of the younger adaptations, I guess. Like Jackie's obviously done his rendition of it in Drunken Master. And Jet's doing his version here. And I guess he kind of like became like synonymous with the character, especially with that look that he has. Like, imagine me, but with like
the long hair ponytail in the back.
Yeah, exactly. So Jet Li's definitely like made like the character almost synonymous with like himself, right? Like when people think of Wong Fei Hung, they think like a young version of Jet Li. So this movie clearly has a huge influence, and I think that this I don't know, like, but actually watching it again, it's not as great as I remember it to be. Although it's not terrible. It's just not. It's not like. So it's not as wonderful or like like the legendary film that I remember it to be. Like, it's like that rose-colored glasses that I put on before watching the film.
Yeah. So can you, I guess, briefly summarize who Wong Fei Hung is? I kind of know the character just because I've seen that character in other films, like the ones you mentioned, but I don't really have a history with him. I understand he is a real person, but maybe details on him have been maybe exaggerated because he's kind of in this legendary status now.
Yeah, he is a folklore legend. But no one really knows much about him. It's just what happens when enough time has passed, and before recorded history or televised history. Like you just kind of like mythologize the guy, and all we know is that he was an apothecary, like medicine doctor, and Chinese medicine doctor, and also he was an expert Hangga practitioner. So like that's basically all we really know in terms of like his legacy and stuff. He's basically what Ip Man became, like in terms of television, movie and entertainment, and like everyone mythologizes the hell out of Ip Man. They did the same thing with Wong Fei Hung. But the interesting thing about Wong Fei Hung and how like this movie is very meta, the Hong Kong industry is very meta, is that his disciple is I'm gonna forget their names. Lam Sai Wing, who is one of his direct students is Lam Sai Wing, and his descendants is Lau Ga Le, who is the legendary director of so many other films, and then his brother, who doesn't really have much of a name in the Hong Kong space because he only did like 2 movies. He was the action choreographer for this movie, partially. And then after a certain point, do you know who became the fight choreographer?
I believe it's Yuen Woo-ping.
Yes, and that explains everything.
It explains a lot towards the end when things start floating around and you get wire work and you get lots of... it becomes a little more wushu-esque.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Like, it's very wuxia, very, like, flying around. And I do remember the second one having a lot of that too, but I remember that being a lot more grounded, and that's what I found very interesting about this first outing are the grounded work. Like the ones that feel a little bit more realistic. Anytime they're flying around, I'm like, I get it's a style of the movie, but I still prefer the grounded work, right? Because like Jet is best when he is working like with like more realistic movements, because that he can do these things. But that'll also lead me to my next point. This doesn't feel like this feels like a Jet Li helmed drama, but it doesn't feel like a Jet Li martial arts movie. And the reason for that is because he was injured.
Oh, okay, I see where you're going. Yes. The martial arts in this film are interesting because we know Jet Li, the very famous martial arts actor, and he's a very great performer, especially in his youth at this time, 1991. But as you mentioned, he jumped from a second story and he landed, I guess, wrong on his foot or leg, and it broke. Was it his foot or leg? I can't recall. It
was his. I think it was his knees, if I remember correctly.
Oh,
yeah,
knees,
he banged up his knees upon impact. Hey, he was the one who signed up to do the stunt. He had an out. They asked him if he wanted a stunt double. He's like, nah, I could do it. So, yeah. But yeah, go on.
And so apparently for a lot of the film, he is doubled, or anything that he is in camera for, he's wearing a cast, but they have to shoot him waist up to hide the fact that he's in a cast. Interestingly enough, his stunt double is Shin Xiang. He went on to choreograph a French film called, I think it's French, a European film called The Musketeer, and that film has a final fight scene containing ladders, where the two characters fight on ladders. Yeah, a lot of people, when that came out, pointed out like, oh, this is just aping Once Upon a Time in China.
Interesting. Okay, I guess I have to watch that. Do they fly around all over the place like that too?
That movie tries to keep things a little grounded, but they use wire work every now and then.
Okay, interesting. I'm gonna have to check that out. Hey, speaking of aping, you know what this movie made me think of? And not that this is the imitator, but the movie that felt like it was imitating this is Ip Man 3.
Really?
I don't know why. It made me kind of think about this. I mean, obviously all the Ip Man movies have this theme about the Westerners coming in there.
Okay, I see what you mean.
That's like the A plot, right? And also, Ip Man movies usually have an A plot and then turns into a B plot. No, I shouldn't call it A and B. They have the first plot and then it turns into a second plot.
Yeah.
This movie has that same problem. I want maybe the problem's a harsh word. Same film structure. It's like here's one story, and then here's another story.
Well, with the Ip Man films, they don't completely go to like a whole nother. Well, actually, you're right. Ip Man 3.
Well, it's a second story. It's a second story that makes me think it was Ip Man 3.
Mm-hmm.
The second story being that there's a rival martial artist who, due to like just being shit out of luck in terms of life, like just kicking him in the balls, like he just turns into a villain. And that's kind of what happens in Ip Man 3 too.
Oh man, yeah, this Ip Man 3 is very, very similar. But it's not almost 2.5 hours long, so
well, yes,
I think I enjoyed the length of Ip Man 3 a lot more than this one.
Yeah, you definitely feel the length of this movie. Again, listening to the commentaries, there's a theory. It's not even theory. Like it's been reported that Hong Kong cinemas would actually truncate the movie, like just for cinema purposes. And then, they could go watch it just so they could get more seats in the audience, and then they could, roll out the next running of it, the movie, and just like keep rolling it, probably cut it down 30 minutes. So there's probably a whole bunch of scenes that are missing in those versions. And I'm wondering if I saw that version somehow, because I don't remember this movie feeling so long. Oh man, it doesn't feel like I don't know, man. Do you think that we could have cut down a lot of it? Because there's also a lot of story beats too. It also feels like it would still be technically difficult to make the movie shorter somehow.
I mean, I would have cut out so much personally. Yunbyo's character, done, completely out of there. The final boss, I would have cut him out of there. I would have changed it to the Brits or the Americans being the final boss.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because then we don't focus on their story anymore. They're the ones who really, really drag things out, because the movie kind of swaps a little halfway through to elaborate on their characters.
Interesting. I would have preferred the second story. I would have gotten rid of all the colonialism and the Western stuff. Maybe
really?
Or maybe that.
I find that I found that stuff a lot more interesting, actually. So I guess to elaborate a little bit on the plot, I don't know exactly what the time period is of this film, but China is being, I guess, would you say colonialized? The Brits are coming in, the Americans are coming in, and a lot of Western influence is also coming in. So you have Jet Li. He is he is your surrogate character. He is your traditional Chinese person. And then you have the character Ant 13. She has come back from, I guess, being in England for 2 years. And she kind of represents the balance. She's a combination of the West, but she's still, a Chinese person. And it's him being unsure about accepting her, even though there is, a blossoming love going on between the two. And there's that constant back and forth with everything else. Jet Li is just so upset about, the foreigners coming in and all these things changing in his hometown, but then realizing that, oh, okay, yeah, maybe we need to start accepting these things and learn to adapt.
Okay. Yes, that is interesting. Although just by summarizing it, you're also obviously glossing over all the actual things that happen. Because it just starts to escalate in terms of what's making the tensions between the foreign powers and the Chinese get worse and worse.
Yeah. And
then at the same time, there's also this second story that happens. It kind of just takes a hard left turn. At first, it feels there's another character that gets introduced. He's kind of set up in the beginning of the movie, and then closer to halfway through the movie, this character just suddenly becomes the main villain, and then all the both stories get intertwined.
Yeah, they come together at the end. I mean, it makes sense, but you want the script doctor to come in and be no, this is two stories. Somebody mashed up two movies and made it work,
Yeah.
But in terms of pacing, like when you're getting towards like the halfway point, it feels like the movie should be ending. Like it feels
Yeah.
like it feels like that natural conclusion should have happened because Jet Li fights that that new character, but then it doesn't end. Like it just keeps on going on, and you're yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is my way of describing it. It is when you get to the halfway point before the second villain or the main villain gets introduced in the movie. That is your second act. That is the end of the second act. And then when he gets introduced, we reset back to the first act.
Yeah.
or rather, we have 2 second acts, and then at the end, it all culminates together.
Okay.
So,
Well,
yeah,
we're going in circles about this second character. How about we go a little more detail into the plot, or do you think I
that was the plot?
do you think I summarized it? Like
that you summarized it pretty
like,
like the plot is a little bit more on the convoluted side. I don't know, Zero, did you find it confusing because you weren't familiar with the Wong Fei-hung character or some of the cultural significance behind certain things? Because watching it from my angle, I was like, I can see how this can be confusing for someone who's like not familiar with Chinese history. And even, I'm Chinese American. Like I barely know as much as I would like to.
I think I was just kind of frustrated with story structure. We would constantly introduce new characters very, very briefly, and then later we would learn how they intertwine. So it felt like we were just getting random characters, and then the whole time I was like, all right, well, how do they fit into here at all? And then it wasn't until later you realize, like, oh, that Porky character or Butcher Wing, he's actually a disciple of Wong Fei-hung. Oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. I'm not familiar with the Wong Fei-hung story, so when I saw him protecting Yun Biao, I'm like, well, who's this now? Who's this new guy? They're getting into this whole battle, and it's just
Again, I'm not the biggest expert either. I only know that there's certain facets about Wong Fei-hung that you kind of need in every adaptation, like Lam Sai Wing, Butcher Wing. I mean, Sammo Hung played him in Magnificent Butcher. Quan Tak Heng, who was the original Wong Fei-hung, like obviously like using that story too for a little bit. I mean, these are all like tropish characters. Maybe trope is not the right word, but like these are characters that you almost always need in these stories, like anything that's involved with Wong Fei-hung. Kind of like the Ip Man movies. Like every Ip Man movie has Bruce Lee in it for some stupid reason. Like either as a cameo,
you know why he's in.
Yeah,
there.
I was like, oh look, Bruce Lee is a little child. Like, but this is Ip Man's movie. Why is he fucking in this? That's basically why like we need all these extra characters. That, like maybe to someone who's not familiar with the Wong Fei-hung folklore, I guess, like they're like, why on earth are there like 5 characters that don't do anything, or like you can cut them out or consolidate, because you can't consolidate them.
Yeah,
like,
no, I realized that. Characters. Yeah, I realized that you kind of needed certain characters, like the what's his name, like the guy with the overbite, played by Jackie Chung, like Bucktooth, or
yeah,
or
I don't know if he's a real
like
character. Apparently, I guess they included him because he's based off of someone real.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you have him. Then you have Yun Bio's character, Foon. Apparently, I understand, like he's also a kind of connected to Wong Fei-hung. So you have him. Then you have Ant 13, which is, I guess, like I remember watching the second movie and hearing Ant 13. It's just like that traditional old DVD, poor subtitles. And I kept on thinking Ant 13, but it kind of looks like there's like a romantic relationship going on. Like this is a little strange.
So that will definitely confuse someone who's not Chinese, I guess. The Chinese, we have a very bizarre way. I mean, maybe not bizarre for us because like we're just used to it, but like for anyone who's listening in, they're like, how come you refer to your aunts on your mother's side different than the way that you refer to them on your father's side? We don't have the same word for that. Like, like we have ways of distinguishing relatives on either side. And then it gets more and more convoluted as you get like branch off. It literally, think of it as a very complicated tree. Like we actually have distinct ways of describing it. So these two are actually not related at all. The way that they, you know, like that's
in
all you
the
need to know.
movie they say they are, I guess, related by name, but not at all by blood.
Yes.
And
Yes.
this serves as kind of like a predicament for Jet Li, because it's very obvious she has an interest in him, and he actually kind of has an interest in her, but he's so stubborn in this kind of traditional way that he feels that he should just be treating her like a relative, when in reality it's very clear, you know, something is going on there.
Yeah. That's also cultural. It's like they're, you know, like they're trying to like play coy with the audience. Like, you know how people complain about like, oh, on The Office, how those Pam and whatever his name like never get together. It's like, this is like that, but 3 movies of that.
I like how it's handled here, though. This is one of the few instances in a martial arts movie where I think the love story is just, it's very quaint and very nice.
Yeah, it's not like over dramatized. It's there, but it's not heavily focused on.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. Yeah, and then like we said before, there's a whole bunch of things going on. I think that some of the production stuff, like listening to the commentary, is actually way more interesting than the movie. And like one in particular being that, you know, there's a reason why Yunbyu is part of this production, and there's I mean, both commentaries both say that Yunbyu actually was not happy with the product, and that's why he does not come back in the sequels for the movie. He actually, you know, like he thought he would be headlining this movie. He thought the movie was going to be about him. And I'm like, okay, that's very interesting.
It sounds like, based on some previous Wang Fei Hung stories, the character Foon was actually the main focus, where Wang Fei Hung was kind of a secondary character. So I think he was led to believe that would be the case with this film. And then once he got on board, you know, it kind of, you know, they pulled the rug from underneath him. He still had to fulfill his film obligations. And then when it came out, it's like, oh, he's technically not the star. But he does take up a big chunk of the film, like we kind of mentioned, him and the other villain character. So, but yeah, he's not Wang Fei Hung, he's not Jet Li. Like he does feel like number 2 in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's why he didn't bother to shave his head. that's why he
wearing
has
the bald cap. Yeah,
he has this really distracting bald cap that you could see where it ends. It's like, you know, like you look at me right now, like you see where the wrinkles, like they slowly fade, where they continue. His just like hard stops. And when it rains, in any scene where it's raining, like it just comes down so easily off of his head. Yeah, and like you said, like there's actually a lot of story, and I can understand why there's a legacy behind this movie. Before we get into the actual action, like this movie apparently has like a big influence on subsequent films. I think, I'm not sure, like after watching this movie, if Ip Man 3 actually did take homage or was paying homage to this movie, because so many of the story beats, I was like, wow, this is literally just like Ip Man 3.
Now that you pointed it out, I really feel like Ip Man 3, you know, you at least use the structure of this film and you know, change things here and there, but it kind of feels like that.
Right. And there's like a future scene, or like a fight scene that happens in the rain later, that someone in their commentary actually mentioned that it reminds them of the Matrix Revolutions. I was like, holy shit, that really does feel like that. And I mean, not to mention, again, like in terms of the legacy of this movie, how it kind of made Jet Li, you know, synonymous again with the character, and how much people, you know, like look back on this movie. But again, we're talking about the action. It's okay. Right?
Yeah, it's weird. This movie has such a big legacy, and I always heard people talk about it a lot. I had the second film, and I really, really liked the fights in that one. But when we watched this movie, I don't want to say I was disappointed. I guess I would say I was expecting more, because there are some, like the final fight, the ladder fight, very, very inventive. Lots of crazy stuff going on in there. Yes, there's wire work, and it doesn't always obey the laws of physics, but I think that and Jackie Chan's ladder fight are like you can't beat those. Like they're just so unique in what they do.
Okay, gotcha. Although, I mean, the second one does it better, right? Like and across the board. From what I remember, I mean, we're gonna cover that next week, and I might be like, like that's it's not as good as I remember that either.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not the case.
Right. But yeah, I think part of my issue too is, we like the fights to kind of just be a fight. Like these two characters or these group of people are just fighting, no interruptions, or with as minimal as you can, right? Maybe a reaction shot here and there, maybe a story beat to move the plot forward. Here, it never feels like we get too many long bouts of choreography. Like something will happen, and then somebody will have to talk, or we'll have to cut to another scene, and then it'll finally come back to the action. I'm thinking of like that ladder fight in the end. Just to go back to it again, like when they first fight on the ladder, like, oh, this is cool, and then we have to go to what other people are doing. And I was like, oh no, but that was great. Don't do that. But then like a little later, they finally give us the rest of the fight, and it's like, oh, okay, that's what I wanted.
Right? Yeah, you would think that a movie like this, especially since it has such a legacy, wouldn't do such a a common sin that we usually hate in most of our movies. But I don't think it's terrible. What I actually don't like about the action choreography is the insert shots to explain action. I didn't know that this was a pet peeve of mine, but actually watching this again, I'm like, wow, I actually don't like this.
Can you recall like a situation?
Yeah, it happens a lot in the last fight, but it does happen throughout the film, but particularly in the last fight where there are shots that you can just see a bunch of things that are happening in the environment to explain the movements between the characters. So there's a moment where one of the characters is like he kicks a ladder. The ladder hits then you see a shot of the ladder hitting the top of the banister. Then you see like the ladder breaks in half, and then you see that the ladder like falls into these two places, and then it creates like this bridge, and then that bridge becomes something that Jet Li can hold on to. Something like that. Like it's like a ripple effect. But like there's so many shots to explain certain things. And
I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's like it just takes too long to set up. Like, okay, this is what's happening, and like, okay, that's way too contrived.
Well, you know what? That's an issue with staging.
Okay.
The action choreography, because you could probably condense a lot of those shots into one shot, right? But that's a decision. Like, okay, we want to show this, so it's clear. We want to show this, so it's clear. But in reality, maybe they could have combined those two shots by maybe trucking out a little more, showing it a little wider, so you see the two motions happening in the same shot instead of individual cuts, right?
Yeah, I was actually gonna go the route of just don't do that bit of choreography, right? If it's that complicated for the audience to understand what's happening, maybe just simplify it. Maybe do something that's a little bit more, for lack of a better word, simple, right? Because like if it requires 4 shots to explain why this ladder is breaking a certain way and changes the position of these characters to be like one way or another, just don't do it. Like, just don't do it. Just do something simpler.
I don't mind the effort that they put in, because the ladder fight is pretty complicated. So I appreciate that they went for it, and they at least had the decency to realize like, oh, this is complicated. We need to sacrifice maybe pacing or the presence of time to show 4 shots instead of shooting it one way.
Yeah.
So I can kind of appreciate it, but I understand. Like, I think there's probably a better way to shoot some of the action.
Yeah. Do you find that it throws the momentum or the speed of the fights off? Because that's what it does for me. Like anytime it happens in this movie, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, I get really distracted by it.
I could see in certain fights where over-explaining stuff like that would throw off the pacing. I think because they're literally fighting and balancing on top of the ladders, if you don't show something to explain some of that stuff, it might feel like an abrupt cut, like, oh, why are they suddenly able to stand like that? Or like, oh, where did that ladder come from?
Yeah.
I think they're just covering all their bases, right? So that it all just visually makes sense and it all works, and people like us can't like poke holes in the plot.
Right. Well, in terms of, I think in terms of my complaints, I think it just stems from a personal like or dislike. Yuen Woo-ping is very hit or miss for me. Because like I actually really like his grounded stuff when we can actually get it. In some of his wire work, sometimes it can be a little bit too much. And this is obviously a movie where I feel like it's appropriate because of the subject matter. It's supposed to feel like a fantastical kind of movie, not to the extent of like Forbidden Kingdom, where we literally have gods and deities fighting one another. Yeah. But this movie is supposed to be kind of like blend the more grounded, realistic stuff and the more fanciful wire work. Because Wong Fei-hung is considered a legend of sorts. So it kind of makes sense that he can do these things. But we kind of overcomplicate the choreography as a result of that. And I kind of don't like that. But you said something before that kind of reminded me, like you said, like you want this movie can make things visually interesting, and I think that has a lot to do with like Choi Hawk's direction. He has a very distinct style when it comes to his movies, and like whether you love him or hate him, because of some of his movies are not, they're not all gems.
He's very hit or miss with me too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least this movie, like I feel like it's visually very compelling. Like I actually like the look of the movie a lot of the times. Yeah,
the look of the film is great. There's lots of great cinematography here and there, just on simple shots and simple storytelling elements. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm glad this wasn't like crazy like late 90s Choi Hawk, where you just get like rapid editing. You get him stretching out scenes, so you get like cut frames and it looks all wacky. So yeah, this is like a very constrained version of him. Yeah. But still being like his style.
Yeah. Well, this is what 90s. I guess is like, well, I wouldn't say early because he still had some stuff in the 80s. Actually, he's one of the pioneers of bringing early or mid 80s technology to filmmaking in Hong Kong. So he's a very prolific director. So like when he made this movie, I think that the visual language of the film, like it still feels very strong. Like, I think that this movie, like when you take any static shots from the movie, it really stands out as opposed to other ones. And that's also like a combination of like his visual eye and use of Dutch angles in certain shots. It's very interesting filmmaking. But then like there's like this theme of like Western expansion in China, and I actually don't know where the movie lies when it comes to that. It's like, do they think it's a good thing or not? Like, by the end of the movie, I'm like, I actually can't tell what the message was. Like, is it good or bad? Like, are you on the side of Western influences or not? Because sometimes it feels like the West is bad, and other times it's like West is good. Look, otherwise you can't progress with the times.
Right. I think the movie stands with, like they need to be accepting of it and adapt to it. I mean, because, Jet Li's character essentially says that. And the whole movie, he's kind of mad at what's going on with the, with the Westerners, with the foreigners coming in. But he starts to realize like, oh, like, like I need to accept this. And then there's also the idea that Chinese Kung Fu can't beat bullets. So, there's all those like little things going on in there. And then same thing with his relationship with Anne 13. You know, she is like the middle ground between West and East, and it like him slowly accepting her because, you know, like all the Western things she brings, he's kind of getting mad at as well.
Yeah, that comes into play a couple times. But hey, I mean, we kind of talked to death about the story. I guess we can kind of talk about the action, and I don't think we should talk about all of them because there's so much that goes on in this movie. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. We're at the point where we give our recommendations, but there's a whole wealth of audio you would be listening to here if you follow us on Patreon. There you can listen to the entire episode, including an exclusive action breakdown of the fights in the movie. And now on to our final thoughts. After 2 hours,
almost 2.5
minutes,
hours,
yeah. I'm actually surprised that the movie ends abruptly because it feels like, oh, you could have padded it out a little bit more.
Well,
but,
I mean,
hey, I'm not asking for it. I'm not asking for it.
Yeah. It doesn't end abruptly because, so I mentioned this earlier. So that's everything. That's Once Upon a Time in China. But the benefit of the long runtime is they actually give everybody a character arc. You know, like Jackie Chung's character gets a character arc. He's so secondary, but you know, like we understand what he's going through, and in the end, you know, he has a turn, and you know, it feels nice. You know, same thing with what's his name, Butcher Wing. You know, like he changes at the end too. So it's you know, like we get a lot of those moments, so we care about these people. It's just that it feels a little too long.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what to add on that. It does feel very long. But I don't know. Does this movie really hold up? Like after watching it, like 30 years after the fact, and I mean, this is your first outing, right? You've never seen this.
This is my first outing. Yes.
Yeah. So, what do you think, Zero? Is it as good as everyone says it is?
I like a lot of things about this movie. It was a little tough to sit through, though. Okay. I can see somebody, you know, who's just getting into martial arts trying to watch this, and maybe they'll get bored with it, with some of the character stuff. Like, it's one of those things too, where the action, you know, there's enough sprinkled throughout, but all the big action beats happen at the end, so you have to wait through all the story and the character stuff to get to it. The character work is good. But as we mentioned many, many times, I don't like how they structured the story. I think it was not the best idea to kind of combine these essentially two sets of characters and have them all like meet together in the end. I think it should have just mainly focused on Jet Li and his group instead of adding Yoon Bio and his master later.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Tough decision for you?
It's tough. I recommend this if you've never seen it. You kind of have to watch it. It is a legacy film. It's good for a reason. But if you have trouble with the older martial arts films, I can see people like possibly getting bored with this.
Okay.
I wasn't bored, but I could definitely feel the length.
Yeah. If that theory holds true that this was two movies that they decided last minute to make one, I wouldn't be surprised because that really does feel like that. I mean, yeah, maybe it could have worked better if it was two movies, but you know, the second story would have been Once Upon a Time in China 2. I don't know, and then the other movies would be pumped in one number. Maybe that would have worked because, like, if we just resolved the A story, like, with 30 minutes more footage, like, it would have been a perfect good movie. But yeah, you're right. This movie is really long. It's incredibly long, and although I will not say that the movie is boring. It is relatively engaging because the story is interesting. The characters are none of them feel one note, which is important to me. Especially with the longer movies, otherwise you're just gonna complain like, why do we need this character? Yeah. Outside like all the historical significance of the movie and what this the portrayal of the character means, and yada yada yada, the influence of Wong Fei-hung. All those things aside, I think this movie is, it still kind of holds up. I don't consider it an old style movie, even though, like, yes, I mean, we're not comparing it to like Shaw Brothers or 80s movies, like, since it literally came out in 91. But I can see why it could feel like an old style movie, because like how like floaty it can be and how like fanciful some of the wire work can get. It does enough where I feel like it feels like it's moving us in the direction of more modern martial arts movies. So, with all that said, with everything I just said, I don't recommend watching just the fight scenes of this movie, because it is not a good showcase of Jet Li's abilities. It is so much of his stunt double that if you're just gonna watch the fight scenes, it's not a good showcase of what Jet Li can do. And like, you kind of want, if you want to watch a Jet Li martial arts movie, go out and watch, like the movies where he's not injured throughout the whole thing. And I think that the story and the movie making and move outside of like the pacing of the movie is good enough that you could just watch the whole film from beginning to end. Maybe if you feel like it, you could find a version of it that's trimmed down a little bit, because I don't remember feeling this long. So yeah, watch a movie with the fight scenes. Don't watch movies out. Don't watch the fight scenes without context. Yeah, that's Wong Fei-hung, or
Wong
Once Upon a Time in China.
Or Once Upon a Time in China.
Yeah. Oh, and do not listen to the original commentary with Mark King and Bay Logan, because that is the worst thing that Bay Logan has ever done.
Second.
Allegedly done. Allegedly.